The sun was setting over the little town, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the corner of Maple Street stood an old but trusted auto repair shop, its faded sign swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of oil, grease, and metal scents that told stories of long hours and countless engines brought back to life. The shop belonged to Henry, a hard-working black mechanic who had spent most of his life fixing cars for people who trusted him more than anyone else in town. Henry was not just skilled, he was respected. Customers came not only for his service but also for his honesty and kindness. If an old lady drove in with a broken car, Henry treated her the same as he would a businessman with a fancy vehicle. He believed every car had a soul, and every driver deserved fairness. Yet, despite his reputation, life wasn't always easy. Running a small repair shop in a town where bigger garages were opening meant he had to fight to keep his place. Still, Henry carried on with quiet dignity. Most evenings, when school was out, his daughter Maya would wander into the shop. She was a bright girl of 16, curious and sharp-eyed. While other kids her age spent time on phones or hung around the mall, Maya preferred sitting near the toolbox, watching her father's hands move with patience and care. She admired the way he listened to engines as if they were speaking to him. Sometimes she asked questions, and Henry, though tired, always explained. He taught her how to listen, how to notice small details, and how to respect the craft of repairing. Maya didn't just watch, she learned. Over time, she picked up the language of gears and pistons, the rhythm of wrenches turning, the whisper of belts when they were off balance. She wasn't a trained mechanic, but her mind was sharp, and her memory held every lesson her father had ever given. But in the eyes of most people around the shop, she was just the mechanic's daughter, someone who fetched water, wiped grease, or played with spare bolts. Few ever imagined she could truly understand the machines. One Friday afternoon, as the workers were cleaning up and the day seemed to be ending, a black truck pulled up. From it stepped Mr. Dalton, Henry's boss, the man who owned the building and had the power to raise or lower rent whenever he wished. Dalton was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the pride of someone who believed money made him superior. He often treated the mechanics as if they were lucky to work under his roof. That day, Dalton had a challenge. In the back of his truck was an engine big, heavy, and silent. He had hauled it from another town after several shops failed to repair it. Mechanics had tried, experts had scratched their heads, and finally, Dalton brought it here with a half-smile, daring anyone to fix what others had called impossible. The senior mechanics gathered around, scratching their heads. They poked at the machine, exchanged guesses, and muttered about how badly it was damaged. Some even laughed nervously, saying it was a waste of time. Dalton crossed his arms, amused at the sight of experienced men defeated. Then, his eyes landed on Maya. She was standing quietly in the corner, her notebook in hand where she often sketched little diagrams of engines her father explained to her. Dalton smirked, his voice carrying through the shop. "What about you, little Miss Mechanic? You've been hanging around here long enough. Think you can fix the beast?" The room went silent. The workers looked at Dalton, then at Maya, unsure if he was joking or serious. Henry's face tightened. He knew Dalton's words carried a tone that was not playful but mocking. It was as if Dalton wanted to prove a point that a young girl, especially one like Maya, had no place near real work. Maya's heart raced. She felt every eye on her, waiting to see if she would laugh it off, hide behind her father, or dare to step forward. She looked at her father, whose eyes softened with concern. Henry wanted to protect her from humiliation. He knew this engine was no simple task, and even grown men had failed to bring it to life. But deep inside, Maya felt a fire. She remembered every moment spent in the shop, every story her father told, every time she'd dreamed of showing that she wasn't just a helper. She took a breath. "I can take a look," she said softly, but her voice carried through the room. The workers exchanged glances. Some chuckled under their breath, not unkindly, but with doubt. Dalton raised his eyebrows, almost delighted by the chance to see her fail. "Well then," he said, stepping aside dramatically, "the floor is yours. Show us what you've got." Henry opened his mouth to protest, but Maya gave him a look that told him she needed this moment. Reluctantly, he stayed silent, his heart heavy but proud. Maya stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the oil-stained floor. She placed her notebook aside and stood before the engine. It was larger up close, intimidating in its silence. She felt the weight of the challenge pressing down on her, the whispers of the workers behind her, and Dalton's smirk hovering nearby like a shadow. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the cold metal. She traced her fingers along the lines of the engine, recalling what her father had taught her: engines don't hide their secrets. You just have to listen, watch, and respect them. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the voices, the laughter, the pressure. She imagined herself back in the evenings when it was just her and her father, the quiet hum of the shop, and the warmth of his patient teaching. The room felt heavier. Dalton cleared his throat, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Careful there, don't get your hands dirty." A few men chuckled, but quickly stopped when Henry's sharp gaze met theirs. Maya ignored the comment. She crouched low, checking connections, looking for signs of wear, noticing the way certain bolts had been tightened unevenly. Something inside her clicked. This wasn't just a pile of metal, it was a puzzle, and puzzles could always be solved. Still, the pressure was enormous. She could feel the doubt around her like a wall. She could almost hear the Maya stood with the engine in front of her, but the weight of doubt pressed harder than the metal itself. Around her, the mechanics whispered quietly, some shaking their heads. A few folded their arms, expecting her to back away after a few minutes. She could almost hear their thoughts: this was no place for a young girl, especially one without years of training. Her father's eyes followed her every move. Henry tried to stay calm, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. He loved his daughter deeply and had always admired her determination, yet this moment was different. He feared that Dalton's dare was not just a test but a trap meant to embarrass both of them. Dalton leaned against the workbench, his smirk never fading. He enjoyed the silence, the tension, the spectacle of it all. To him, this was entertainment. He didn't believe for one second that Maya could make progress, and the idea of watching her struggle amused him. Maya bent closer to the engine, touching one part after another. At first, her movements were slow, uncertain, almost hesitant. She remembered what her father once told her: engines are like people. They give hints about their problems, but you have to pay attention. The words gave her courage, but as she began unscrewing the outer casing, her hands shook slightly. One of the senior mechanics chuckled softly. "She doesn't even know where to start," he whispered, though not softly enough. Maya heard him, and her cheeks warmed, but she did not turn away. She kept going, carefully removing bolts and setting them aside in a neat row, just like Henry had taught her. Dalton tapped his watch and laughed. "Any time now. You've got an audience." His voice was smooth but sharp, like he wanted to slice her confidence in two. Maya swallowed hard. The engine was complicated. Pipes twisted into each other, valves sat heavy with grease, and wires looked tangled and tired. For a moment, she felt small and foolish. "Maybe I shouldn't have said yes," she thought. "Maybe this really is impossible." She glanced at her father. His face was serious, but his eyes gave her strength. They seemed to say, "Trust yourself, Maya. You know more than you think." She closed her eyes briefly, blocking out Dalton's laugh, the whispers, the tension. She pictured the nights when she sat beside her father as he explained diagrams, the afternoons when she held a flashlight while he repaired a neighbor's truck, the small victories when she guessed the problem before Henry confirmed it. Her heart steadied. She wasn't just a girl standing before an impossible engine. She was a learner, a thinker, and someone who believed in the hidden logic of machines. Opening her eyes again, she took a slow breath and continued. But as she dug deeper, the first wave of frustration hit her. The parts didn't seem to line up with what she remembered from other engines. This one was older, heavier, more complicated. She tried adjusting one section, but it wouldn't move. She pulled at a belt, but it slipped back into place. The more she tried, the more stubborn the machine became. Whispers turned into quiet laughter. One mechanic muttered, "Told you. Waste of time." Another shook his head, looking almost embarrassed for her. Dalton chuckled openly now, clapping his hands together once. "I guess the legend of the mechanic's daughter ends here, doesn't it?" Maya's face flushed. For a second, she felt like running away, hiding behind the door, never stepping into the shop again. The weight of failure was heavy. She could almost feel it pressing on her shoulders. But then something unexpected happened. As she leaned back to catch her breath, her eyes fell on a small part near the base of the engine. It was faint, almost invisible, but there was a mark, tiny scratches around a bolt that didn't match the wear of the rest. Her father's words echoed again, "Every engine leaves clues. Even the smallest scratch has a story." Her pulse quickened. She leaned closer, ignoring the room around her. She studied the part carefully and realized that someone had tried to force it earlier but hadn't put it back correctly. That misalignment could easily affect the timing system. It wasn't obvious, and it wasn't something most people would notice, but to her it stood out like a bright light in the dark. Her hands stopped trembling. She picked up the right tool, adjusted her grip, and began working on the bolt. This time, her movements were firm, steady, confident. The men who had been laughing grew quiet, watching her hands move with unexpected certainty. Dalton narrowed his eyes. The smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a curious frown. But Maya's struggles weren't over. As she corrected one part, another section refused to budge. She pulled harder, but the tool slipped, nearly cutting her hand. The laughter started again, though softer this time. She could feel their eyes judging her. Her breath came faster, frustration building inside her. For a moment, she almost gave in to the doubt. What if I was wrong? What if fixing this one part doesn't matter? What if I fail in front of everyone, and my father has to bear the shame too? Henry finally stepped forward, but before he could speak, Maya looked at him quickly, shaking her head. She wasn't ready to quit. Something in her heart told her that she was closer than anyone realized. She remembered another piece of advice her father gave: engines talk when you're patient. If you rush, you'll miss the message. She paused, closed her eyes again, and listened not with her ears, but with her mind. She traced back the chain of problems. If this part was out of line, what else would it affect? Slowly, the puzzle began to form in her imagination. Her breathing slowed. She adjusted her tools and went back to work, this time focusing not on the whole intimidating engine but on one small section at a time. She wiped away grease, tightened a belt, then rechecked the alignment. Bit by bit, she moved forward. Dalton sighed loudly, clearly bored. "Still at it," he said, though his voice wasn't as confident as before. One of the younger mechanics leaned forward, whispering to another, "She's onto something. Look at the way she's moving now." The shop grew strangely quiet. The earlier laughter was gone. Now there was only the soft clink of tools and the sound of Maya's steady breathing as she worked. She still struggled, every piece fought her hands, every screw seemed heavier than it should. Sweat formed on her forehead, and grease smeared her arms. But beneath the frustration, there was determination. Even when her strength faltered, her focus did not. Her father stood tall now, his pride growing silently. He could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire he once had when he was young and eager to prove himself. He didn't care whether she fixed the engine or not, what mattered was that she had the courage to stand in front of doubters and keep going. But Maya herself wasn't ready to settle for courage alone. She wanted results. She wanted to show them all that she wasn't just a child hanging around the shop. And though the engine still looked impossible, she felt closer than ever to finding the truth hidden inside its silence. The struggle wasn't over, but the first sparks of discovery had begun to glow. She was no longer just trying, she was searching, listening, and beginning to understand what others had missed. And that shift, small as it seemed, was enough to change everything. The shop was unusually quiet now. The sound of laughter had faded, replaced by the small, careful clicks of tools in Maya's hands. Every person in the room, from the youngest helper to the oldest mechanic, watched her closely. They had started by doubting, then mocking, but now their eyes carried something else: curiosity. Maya bent closer to the engine, her mind racing. She traced the connections in her imagination like a map. The scratches around that misaligned bolt had already told her a story. Someone had forced the part in a hurry and left it slightly out of place. That tiny mistake could ripple through the whole system. She knew engines didn't simply break for no reason. One problem often caused another, like dominoes falling one after another. If she could find the first domino, she could stop the chain. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear anymore. It was the excitement of discovery. She tightened the bolt carefully, her small hands steady now. Then she moved to the timing belt, her eyes narrowing as she noticed it was stretched tighter on one side than the other. She pressed her fingers gently along the belt and felt the uneven tension. Her father had once explained, if the timing belt is even a little off, the whole engine loses rhythm. It's like a musician playing out of tune, it spoils the whole song. Those words came back to her now. She adjusted the belt slowly, carefully loosening one side and balancing the other. One mechanic stepped closer, tilting his head. "Wait a minute, she's checking the timing," he muttered. Another nodded, whispering, "That's what I thought too, but I never caught the misalignment." Dalton frowned, his smirk shrinking a little more. He had expected her to quit by now, to cry or give up in embarrassment. Instead, she was making steady progress. The thought unsettled him, though he tried not to show it. Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. The room felt hot, though the fans were spinning above. Every part she touched seemed to fight her, but she didn't back down. She had learned from her father that patience was a mechanic's best tool. "Don't rush. Listen. Machines don't like being forced," he had said countless times. She remembered those lessons now. Instead of tugging hard, she adjusted gently, letting each part fall into place naturally. When one section clicked correctly, a spark of confidence warmed her chest. She was not lost anymore, she was finding a path. Still, the work was far from easy. Some bolts were rusted, others too tight. Her fingers ached from twisting, and her nails carried black grease she couldn't wipe off. At one point, a piece slipped from her hand and clattered loudly on the floor. The sound echoed in the silence, making her flinch. Dalton chuckled under his breath, but the mechanics didn't laugh this time. Instead, one of them bent down, picked up the piece, and placed it gently back on the bench beside her. "Thanks," Maya whispered, surprised by the quiet gesture. The man only nodded, his eyes showing something that hadn't been there earlier: respect. Dalton shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the mood in the room was changing. His little dare, which he thought would end in laughter at Maya's expense, was beginning to turn into something else. People were no longer waiting for her to fail, they were waiting to see what she might discover. Maya leaned in again, her eyes sharp. She studied the fuel line, tracing it with her fingers. Something didn't sit right. The line seemed clean, but when she touched the connector, she felt a faint looseness. That could cause irregular flow, starving the engine at the wrong time. She grabbed a wrench, tightened it gently, and checked again. The connection was firmer now. Piece by piece, she uncovered mistakes, small ones, but enough to confuse anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Misaligned bolts. An uneven belt. A loose fuel line. She realized the engine wasn't broken beyond repair, it was simply suffering from neglect and rushed hands. Whoever worked on it before had been careless. Her father stepped a little closer, his face filled with quiet pride. He didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. That's my daughter. She's seeing what others don't. Maya's shoulders straightened. The whispers of doubt no longer stung. Instead, they fueled her determination. Every correction she made felt like a small victory, like proving to herself that she belonged here, not as a helper but as someone capable of real work. But the turning point came when she reached the ignition system. She noticed corrosion around one of the connectors, greenish residue that could block proper contact. She remembered her father once showing her the same issue on a neighbor's car. Corrosion is like dust on your glasses, he explained. You can still see, but not clearly. Clean it off, and suddenly everything becomes sharp again. Her heart leapt. She knew this was important. She grabbed a brush, carefully cleaned the area until the metal shone brighter. Then she reattached the connector, making sure it was snug. By now, the mechanics had gathered closer, their arms no longer crossed, their expressions no longer skeptical. They weren't mocking, they were learning, watching closely as Maya revealed problems they hadn't noticed themselves. Dalton's smirk had completely vanished. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. This doesn't mean anything yet, he said loudly, trying to regain control of the room. Engines don't come back to life with little touches. But even his voice lacked confidence now. Maya didn't respond. She was too focused. Her mind was alive with connections, every correction she made leading her closer to the truth. She didn't feel like a nervous girl anymore. She felt like a detective, uncovering secrets hidden in plain sight. Her hands moved with steady rhythm, cleaning, tightening, aligning. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, one by one. She wasn't done yet, but for the first time, she believed fully that the engine could be saved. When she finally leaned back to wipe her hands on a rag, the shop was silent. Everyone waited for her to speak, but she stayed quiet, her eyes still fixed on the machine. She knew there was more work ahead, but she also knew something had shifted. The engine wasn't impossible anymore, it was simply waiting for the right hands to listen. Her father stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. The moment stretched long inside the shop. The air was heavy with the smell of grease and the faint sound of the ceiling fan turning above. Every pair of eyes was on Maya. She had worked for hours without giving up, and though sweat clung to her forehead and her arms were smeared with oil, her focus never wavered. She had already corrected things others had missed, but the real test was still ahead, whether the engine would respond. Dalton leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly across his chest. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of discomfort. He wasn't ready to admit it, but something inside him told him this girl was different. Still, he cleared his throat and said loudly, "It won't make a difference. You can tighten bolts all day, but this machine is finished." The mechanics didn't answer him. Their eyes were fixed on Maya. The way she moved, calm but precise, had captured their respect. Even the ones who had laughed at her earlier now stood quietly, their doubt replaced with cautious hope. Maya studied the engine one last time. Her heart raced, but not from fear. She felt something stronger now, conviction. She could sense the engine's silence was not final. It was as if the machine itself was waiting for someone to notice its pain and bring it back to life. Her father, Henry, stood close, his large hands resting on the edge of the workbench. He wanted to step in, to guide her, but he held back. This was her moment. He had taught her everything he knew, and now she was proving that she had been listening all along. His eyes glistened with quiet pride, though his lips stayed firmly closed. Maya adjusted her tools, tightened the last connection, and finally straightened up. Her chest rose and fell as she looked at the group around her. She didn't make a grand speech or claim victory. She simply said, "It's ready to test." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Dalton raised his eyebrows, as if amused. "Oh? Well then, let's see this miracle of yours," he said, his voice dripping with doubt. One of the senior mechanics stepped forward to help. He respected the work she had done and wanted to ensure the test was fair. He connected the engine properly, wiped his hands, and nodded toward Maya. "Go ahead," he said gently. Maya hesitated for just a moment. Her palms were sweaty, and her throat felt dry. She knew this was at the moment that would either prove everyone wrong or confirm all their doubts. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and pressed the switch. The engine coughed. The sound startled the room. It wasn't smooth, but it was something. A faint sputter turned into a shake, then another cough. Maya held her breath, praying silently. She adjusted a small dial she had tightened earlier. Suddenly, the coughing turned into a low hum. The hum grew louder, smoother, steadier. The engine was alive. The entire shop erupted in gasps. The machine that had been declared impossible to fix was running again, its steady rhythm filling the room like music. For a few seconds, everyone just stood frozen, staring in disbelief. Dalton's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His confident posture seemed to collapse, and he shifted uncomfortably as if searching for an explanation. The mechanics, however, broke into applause. One by one, they clapped, their voices rising in excitement. "She did it," one shouted. Another laughed in amazement, shaking his head. "I can't believe it. She actually fixed it." Henry's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. He stepped toward his daughter and placed both hands on her shoulders. "You did it, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up at him, smiling shyly, her eyes shining brighter than the engine itself. Dalton, unwilling to accept what had just happened, stepped forward quickly. "This doesn't prove anything," he said sharply. "Maybe it just needed a push, maybe the sound of the engine filled the shop, steady and strong, like a heartbeat that had returned after being silent for too long." The mechanics stood in awe, still clapping and cheering, some shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe what their eyes were seeing. For years they had worked with engines, but it was Henry's young daughter who had solved the puzzle they had given up on. Maya stood quietly, her hands covered in grease, her clothes smudged, but her face glowing with a mix of relief and quiet pride. She didn't raise her hands in victory or boast about what she had done. Instead, she simply watched the machine hum, satisfied that her patience and focus had been rewarded. Henry looked at her, his chest swelling with pride. He had always known Maya was gifted, but to see her shine in front of everyone, even in front of those who doubted her, made his heart feel lighter than it had in years. He gently placed his arm around her shoulders and whispered, "This is your day." Dalton, however, stood frozen. His face was stiff, his lips pressed tight. He had expected failure. He had imagined laughter at her expense, imagined Henry embarrassed and Maya retreating in shame. But none of those things had happened. Instead, he had been proven wrong in front of his own workers. One of the older mechanics turned to Dalton with a grin. "Boss, I think the girl just taught us all a lesson," he said, chuckling softly. The men around him nodded in agreement. Some of them walked over to Maya, patting her on the back, offering words of respect. "You've got real talent," one said. "I didn't see what you saw," admitted another. "You've got an eye for details most of us missed." Maya blushed, not used to so much attention. She simply nodded politely, her quiet smile never fading. Dalton finally spoke, his voice tight. "Don't get carried away. One lucky fix doesn't make you a mechanic." His words cut through the room, but they didn't carry the same weight as before. The respect in the eyes of the workers had already shifted. They no longer looked at Dalton with the same admiration, they looked at Maya with something new, belief. Henry stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. That wasn't luck, Dalton. That was skill. She saw what others didn't, and she worked until the problem was solved. You dared her because you thought she would fail, but she proved you wrong. Dalton's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he would argue again, but the sound of the engine running smoothly left him with no room to deny the truth. He turned away, muttering under his breath, clearly frustrated but unwilling to admit defeat. Meanwhile, the rest of the shop seemed alive with new energy. The workers who had doubted her earlier now looked at Maya with genuine respect. For them, it wasn't just about the engine, it was about witnessing determination, patience, and quiet confidence turn into success. As the evening light poured through the dusty shop windows, the crowd slowly dispersed, each person carrying the story in their hearts. They knew this moment would be remembered, told, and retold in town for years to come, the day the mechanic's daughter fixed the impossible engine. Henry closed the hood of the engine, turned it off, and wiped his hands. Then he looked at Maya with eyes full of pride. You didn't just fix a machine today, he said softly. You proved that ability has no age, no gender, and no limits. You taught everyone here something they'll never forget. Maya lowered her head slightly, humbled by his words. I just did what you taught me, she replied. Henry smiled. No. You went beyond that. You trusted yourself. That's what made the difference. Later that night, as the shop grew quiet and the workers had gone home, Maya sat beside her father outside, the cool night air washing away the heat of the day. The stars sparkled above, and the sounds of the town were faint in the distance. Did you see Dalton's face? Maya asked, laughing softly. Henry chuckled. I'll remember it forever. He didn't know what to do when that engine came to life. His laughter faded into a sigh. But remember, Maya, you don't have to prove yourself to men like him. What matters is that you know your worth. Maya nodded slowly. I know. But I'm glad I didn't give up. For a moment, I almost walked away. Her father looked at her gently. And that's the lesson, isn't it? Everyone faces moments when giving up feels easier. But you stayed, you listened, and you believed in yourself. That's why the engine runs tonight. The two of them sat quietly for a while, letting the stars keep them company. In the days that followed, news spread quickly. Customers who came to the shop asked about the girl who fixed the impossible engine. Some came just to see her, curious to meet the daughter who had done what trained men couldn't. For many, she became a symbol of fresh hope and possibility. Dalton, though still reluctant to praise her, never dared her again. He had learned that behind her quiet eyes was a sharp mind and strong will. He could no longer treat her as just the mechanic's daughter. She had earned her place in the shop, not with words, but with proof. The mechanics who had once doubted her now sought her opinion, sometimes asking her to check their work, sometimes inviting her to join them when tough cases came in. At first, she felt shy, unsure if she deserved the attention, but over time she grew more confident. She realized she had truly crossed a line, no longer just an observer, but part of the team. Henry watched all this with quiet joy. He had always dreamed that his daughter would find her strength, whether in the shop or elsewhere. Now he knew she carried not only his lessons but also her own courage, a mix powerful enough to open any door in her future. And as for Maya, she never forgot that day. It wasn't just about fixing an engine. It was about proving that possibilities live where others see impossibilities. It was about standing tall in the face of doubt, about listening to the quiet lessons machines and life itself try to teach. Years later, when she would look back, she wouldn't remember the grease on her hands or the ache in her arms. She would remember the faces in the shop, the silence before the engine roared, and the pride in her father's eyes. She would remember that once, in a small town garage, she shocked everyone not with loud words or bold claims, but with patience, courage, and skill. And that was the true victory.